Hi folks, Paula MacLean again, and we're back with Module 4 of Mastering the Basics. This module is all about creating employee engagement and improving employee retention. I think you're going to love some of the strategies and some of the approaches that we're going to talk about. Let's start off by talking about three words that are often used kind of interchangeably, but they really mean something quite different. The word that we're using most often now is a word called engagement, and I'm not exactly sure we always understand the difference between employee satisfaction and employee engagement. So I'm going to clear that up for you right away. And another word that we often use is morale, and I often hear morale used by baby boomers my age. It's a kind of an old-fashioned word in some ways. But it's often used in the context of a morale problem, as opposed to we have great morale in our team. So we often talk about morale issues, et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of gotten a negative kind of spin. And the other word is satisfaction. So I want to talk about the difference between employee satisfaction and employee engagement. And sometimes we think those are kind of semantic or kind of academic kinds of differences. And I'm going to tell you that I think there's a really substantive difference between the two things, employee satisfaction and employee engagement. So let's start off with just giving you a little story. Let's suppose that you decide to have a dinner party. And you plan out the menu and you do your grocery list and you go off and you do some pretty fancy grocery shopping and you bring everything back, and the day of the party comes and you clean the house and you cook a fabulous meal, and your friends who are there think this is wonderful. They are totally satisfied, and you're probably telling you they ate too much and they've never had, roast beef or vegetarian delight. They've never had those things before that tasted so fabulous, and everybody is really happy and satisfied. And they're patting their bellies and sitting around and having a wonderful moment after the meal. Now, this is what we talk about satisfaction. Satisfaction is actually a passive state. You've received something, you have a certain feeling, you have a certain kind of energy inside of you that says, I am satisfied, I'm happy with my current state of affairs. So it really is created out of external events very often. Our internal interpretation of those events, a great meal having been had, wonderful company, great conversation, some laughter, and then we sit back and we say we are satisfied. So this is a passive state. Now I want you to think about a different story, and that is a group of friends are sitting around the table and say, you know what, we should do a great gourmet dinner. We should all get together, even the cooks and the non-cooks together. We should all get together. We should decide on a menu. We should put that menu together. We should divide up the grocery shopping. Each of us should make one dish. The whole thing will come together and it will taste fabulous. And you decide that's exactly what we're going to do. So everybody sits around, plans the menu, plans the grocery shopping, and then the day of the party arrives and everybody comes and they've done some of their prep work and they're in your kitchen and they're having a grand time and all of the dishes come together. You sit down, you have a fabulous meal, and everybody is happy at the end of that meal. Let's suppose the meal was equally as good as the meal that you cooked on your own all by yourself, but there's a different feeling in the room. And so your friends and family that have come to this dinner have been engaged. They've been totally active and involved, and they've participated in a meaningful way in putting together a wonderful meal for the whole group. That's the difference between satisfaction being passive and engagement being active. And so I think as our organizations within the not-for-profit and human services sectors move, we are actually seeking employee engagement. We have moved away from the passive state of satisfaction, and we have moved into the active state of wanting an involved, participating workforce. Now, we measure engagement and satisfaction in very similar ways. So one of the things we do is we often do surveys, sometimes we do interviews, sometimes we do focus groups. A good deal of my ongoing consulting practices is supporting and assisting agencies to build surveys, administer them, create the data analysis that comes after them, prepare the report, that sort of thing. And very often what we're asking about are questions that relate to both satisfaction and engagement. So good surveys are designed around active kinds of engagement types of questions. And what we know is that high levels of engagement and high levels of satisfaction also are what we would call, we have a team with high morale. So those three words kind of now come together and say the morale that we have as a result of engagement, which is an active thing, is a good thing. So morale is kind of the outcome of the activities that are creating engagement inside your organization. Now I want to talk about a myth inside our sector, and that is pay, the compensation that we receive, is a driver of retention and a driver of satisfaction and driver of engagement. And of course, there's a ton of literature, a ton of research that's been done that says pay is a maintainer. And what we mean by that is that a certain level of pay is required in order for someone to stay with the organization. However, what we also know is all of the other things that are management practices of the organization are actually more important than pay, assuming that we have a minimal level of pay. Now, we have a challenge in this sector in that we pay people far less than we would like to, based on the responsibilities they have, and most people, the hard work that they do inside our sector. And so we would like to pay more, and the pay is usually attached to the funding that we receive. And so what we really are saying is that we feel pay is an issue because it's not at the minimum level that will retain people. And in some organizations, that's absolutely the case. Now, sector-wide and across both sides of the 49th parallel, we are making inroads in paying people better and having better benefit packages, pension plans, and those sorts of things have improved substantially over the last 10, 15 years. We have made inroads in that area. Our responsibility of leaders, however, in addition to continuing to advocate with our funders and our grantors to be able to create a better compensation program that maintains people in their job and gives them what we often call a living wage, our role as leaders is to, in addition to that, do everything in our power to make sure that we create a workplace where there's support, where there is a responsive working environment, and an environment that engages people in conversations and input and feedback that sustains a workforce over the longer term. So people stay in our sector, and many of us, me included, have stayed for a whole career. Some of you might say a whole lifetime, and we often live our work, which suggests to us that there's something else at play in addition to the compensation that we receive. And so our job as leaders is to create an enriched working environment that actually has a positive impact on employee morale, employee satisfaction, employee engagement, call it whatever you want, and that connection is connected to employee retention. So here's what the research shows. It says that highly engaged, highly satisfied workforces, groups of people who are working together, are likely to stay with their employers. That seems absolutely intuitively right. And the reverse is also true, that if a workforce is not satisfied, if a group of people are not satisfied and they are not engaged, regardless again of what we pay them, because we tend to pay fairly equitably across the sector, meaning we pay the same, we still don't pay enough. And when we have lower levels of engagement, lower levels of satisfaction, because of the working climate that I talked about a second ago, we have lower levels of retention and higher turnover. Now, retention and turnover then are the opposite sides of the same coin. So I want to talk about for a second, what are the things that undermine satisfaction and engagement? So we're going to go to the dark side for just a second, and then I'm going to talk lots about what we can do to create better satisfaction, better engagement. First of all, lack of support from supervisors and managers. So if we have insufficient supervision or supervisors who are too busy doing other work and they're not actually engaged in interacting and supporting and coaching and being involved with the people that they work with, that is a downer for employee morale and engagement. Negative coworkers, we know that it just flies through a team when we have something that's gossipy, backstabby, grapeviney going on. And so people who are negative will kind of just, weave their way through a team like a snake, and that has a negative impact on employee satisfaction. Lack of praise and lack of recognition for work, and that includes from peers, from coworkers, as well as from people who are leaders inside the organization, can have a very negative impact. So if you're only seeing your supervisor or only having a conversation when you are in an interaction that is negative, when you're getting critical feedback, clearly the lack of positive reinforcement, positive praise is a real downer for people if it's not there in sufficient quantity and it's not rich enough and personalized. We also know that if people are uncertain about the goals of the team, of the organization, of the services or program that they work in, if they're uncertain about the vision of the organization or the team, that we will experience lower levels of satisfaction. And connected to that is really people saying, I really am way overworked. My workload is excessive. And excessive to me means it's not just peak season or a bad day or a difficult week or, it's Christmas holidays and everything is kind of chaotic. That kind of thing is expected in all workplaces, frankly, not just in human services. And what we really do know is that high workloads that are constantly high over a period of time have an enormous impact on the stress of the people in those workplaces and, in fact, have impact on lower levels of satisfaction and lower levels of engagement. People begin to care less, and we often call that burnout. I often call it brownout. Burnout is really, really serious. The only cure to burnout is usually time off the job or a complete and total change of jobs. But brownout inside our workplaces is a really common thing. I'm going to do another little video series at some point in time in terms of stress management and dealing with burnout and brownout. I want to talk now about the engagement connection with retention. Really an important connection here, and it's not a complicated one, but higher levels of engagement lead to higher levels of employee retention. And we know that engagement is mainly a function of the things inside the organization and how managers manage and how supervisors supervise. So this has kind of a perception often inside our sector that there's not much we can do to change retention. And yes, some people leave because of money. That's an absolute reality. And very often we see them leaving to other organizations, particularly public sector organizations, where they leave because the money out there is much greater. But let me tell you that we still have higher levels of retention than we do of turnover. So even in a fairly high turnover environment where you might have 20 or 25% of your employees leaving you annually, you still have 75 or 85% who are staying. And why do they stay? They stay because of the internal climate of the organization. So do not believe for a minute that management practices and the way we supervise and manage and our policies and how flexible or rigid we are, that those things don't have the ultimate impact and the biggest impact on employee retention. So while I would never argue that money isn't an issue in this sector, and I've been a long-term advocate of better pay, better wages, better compensation, the reality is that we have more influence and more control than we think we do over employee retention. So my intention is to show you what we can do to have real positive kinds of impact on that. Now, what creates high levels of satisfaction and engagement? Well, it's kind of the reverse of the earlier list, but let me still go through it. First of all, opportunities for input, participation, and involvement, meaningful opportunities. And we're not talking about management makes a decision, rolls it out, and then asks for feedback. That is not input. That is feedback. Feedback comes after the fact. Input comes before. So if you're going to manage change, for example, the best strategy is to create input and engagement in the design and implementation and the how we do the change management process. And so really important that we look at how are we engaging people, what is the conversation that we're involved with them in. Now, management cannot consult on every single minute decision that it's going to make. However, there are systemic ways that we can do consultation that does a quick little survey, does a quick email, does a check-in. I've used sets of flip chart paper with questions at the top, and people write their comments on sticky notes and stick them on the thing, and we just kept them on a boardroom wall for a week, and as people came and went for other meetings, they put their thoughts and ideas up. That's input. That's a meaningful way of being engaged in the decision-making process. And what is really important is that we use that input to structure what we are doing by way of decision-making, planning, change management as we go along. Because if we create opportunities for input and then ignore all the input, the phrase I often use is called, if we ask, we must act. which means people have to be able to see their ideas in some substantive way over time. Every person's not going to see every idea that they have in every decision, but over time, a group of employees who work with you have to be able to say, you know what, it's the input we give is meaningful because we see the results in the changes that are being managed, the plans that are being made, the decisions that are being rolled out. Praise and recognition, absolutely critical, and what the research literature shows is that praise from peers, from coworkers, is twice as important as praise or recognition from management. So this means we need to create a culture within teams that says the team is responsible for supporting coworkers, each other inside the team, not just management and supervisors. And we can do that in a number of ways. We can do it with formal team building, but we can do it by creating a positive environment that invites feedback, that invites the kinds of conversations that will lead to, you did an awesome job of that, or thanks for having my back. That was a real big crisis we lived through, and I just want to celebrate that. And we can do that from inside the team. It doesn't always have to be driven or led by supervisors or managers. Recognition from others for achievement and effort. So this is not even, can be outcome. We have lots of conversations about outcomes and results, but it's just, thanks for going the extra mile. Thanks for pulling that extra shift. Thanks for coming in at 3 o'clock in the morning when somebody else got sick. So that recognition and acknowledgement that you've done something either over and above or that you've done a good job of what is normally your job, either of those things become really important. And it's absolutely critical that employees believe and see that managers and supervisors understand their contributions, that we actually see what people are doing. And this sometimes means that higher level management needs to get out into programs and services, spend time with direct service staff, walk a mile in their shoes with them, and have a day in the life of the employee. And that will let managers truly understand and appreciate. I'm not suggesting they do the employee's job, because most managers and supervisors probably don't have the capacity to do that in some cases. I really would like you to see, though, what is going on out in the field, and that, a day in the life of your employees is probably not a real easy day. And it is really a wonderful experience for managers and supervisors to go out into the field and spend time with people and see the work that they do and see hands-on what the contributions are that employees are making. Engagement is an outcome then. It is a result of all of the management practices rolled up inside the organization. So every policy, every HR practice, everything that you do inside your organization as leaders of the organization, engagement is a result of those things. And lack of engagement is also a result of those things. And so pay notwithstanding, we can do things inside our organization which have a huge impact on engagement, satisfaction, and therefore on employee retention. Organizations with higher levels of recognition alone, just aside from all of the other things, have 31% lower voluntary turnover. Voluntary turnover means employees who have decided to leave of their own volition, of their own choice. So retention and turnover are opposite sides of the same coin. High levels of retention means low levels of turnover, and vice versa. We often track turnover, and we really need to acknowledge that our goal is retention. So I really like it when we talk about retention and improving retention rather than reducing turnover, because it sets us on that positive path. And it's often, we ask the question, what do we do to reduce turnover? Well, I would rather ask the question of what do we do to keep the people that we already have. And I like it when we then flip our data collection away from just tracking turnover and converting those numbers into retention data. So 15% turnover is 85% retention. I'd like us to talk about improving retention and reporting and tracking retention. Not all turnover is bad, and you know that you have had employees leave your teams, leave your organization where you were completely at ease and happy that exit took place. And so we do need good people, and we don't want to lose good people. And some turnover is inevitable. Some turnover is not within our control. We're going to talk about that on the next slide. But there's some turnover that, frankly, when we see people's career opportunities opening up, we're happy to shake their hand, have tea and cookies and be done with them. And so that sounds maybe a little bit harsh, but the reality is that let's call a spade a spade. Some people are not a good fit with the sector. Some people have been good fits in the organization, but they've lost their way. Somehow their attitude has changed and they've gone to the dark side. And so we really do want to say goodbye to those people in a positive way. We'd rather have them leave on their own accord than we would have to dismiss them. But the reality is, even if we dismiss some very difficult employees, that's an okay thing as well. And it's our responsibility to the whole team and to the clients, participants, and users who rely on us for quality of service to not let negative people who are not doing their job continue to undermine the quality of supports that we're delivering or undermine the morale and engagement of other employees in the team. But we do not want to lose any more of the good people than we absolutely have to, and so we really need to act in ways that will help support the retention of our best people. Now, here's a little number for you. It's a big number, actually. $5,000 is approximately a conservative estimate of what it costs to lose an employee and to bring their replacement in and get that person up to speed. So that includes all of the hard costs involved in everything from little minor goodbye gifts all the way through to posting an ad, screening applications, holding interviews, reference checking, waiting for all of your credential checking and documentation to come around. So all of those costs combined, about $5,000 minimum. And if we looked at the hidden costs like lost productivity, miscommunications, difficulties getting the person up to speed, all of the extra kind of coaching and support that are kind of soft costs, it's probably way more than $5,000. So very conservatively, $5,000. So we have turnover that is higher than we want it to be, and often the turnover is selective. It's in chunks of parts of the team. You may have one team that's having, some morale issues and you lose a few good people. You also may have some positions inside the organization, part-time, casual, relief positions that are turning over at a higher rate than you would like them to be. Sometimes staff who are isolated geographically, so they're working in different locations, or work some very kind of late hours or long hours, or perhaps if you're in a residential environment, people who work night duty kinds of positions. Those positions are more vulnerable for higher turnover than we want them to do. So we believe sometimes that they're driven primarily by external factors, but what the literature says and what my own 25 years of consulting experience says is there's stuff we can do about this, and we should not wash out on it. We should accept responsibility for making some positive changes. And so everyone who's in a leadership role, in fact, has a role to play in improving employee engagement and improving retention. All right, I want to talk now about two types of turnover and just shift gears a little bit because this gets a little bit technical, but kind of hang in with me. What I want to do is to talk about avoidable and unavoidable turnover. And the first one on your slide is unavoidable. This is the types of turnover that are caused by things that are beyond our control, truly. Family relocation, illness, disability, planned retirement, young family needing mom or dad at home during a critical time in the growth of the children, seasonal employment, people who come as students to us and then who leave. Clearly, those are unavoidable. If we have a program closure as a result of restructuring or loss of funding, those are unavoidable. And we should sort out those unavoidables from your total overall turnover. We call that total turnover gross turnover. So the biggest number we have is the gross turnover, and we subtract from that the unavoidable turnover. Now be very careful when you define avoidable turnover for your organization. And in my book, Taming Turnover, Creating Strategies for Employee Retention, I talk about the definitional problems because we have to be very careful that we don't start lumping in a whole bunch of exits of employees and call them unavoidable when in fact they are avoidable. And I'll just give you an example. Return to school. It's kind of a gray area, isn't it? Because it talks about, is this somebody who is really leaving us because they have no choice and we have no influence over that? Or are they leaving because they've kind of run their course and maybe they're losing their energy and they're browning out, so they return to school? So we might have information about what kind of exit that is, and in some cases it might be truly unavoidable, because if it's a long-term career goal to return to university or college to complete another diploma or degree, then that could be in fact unavoidable. But some cases are of return to school, and we have some influence over that. And we can say, can we give you something a little bit different? Or can we support your return to school, but you continue to work for us part-time? So we don't lose a good person and we retain them, but we give them some balance. Can we give you some sponsorship? Can we pay for books? Can we pay for partial tuition? And that might cause the person to have a return service commitment. So once they're graduated, they come back to us, or perhaps during the summer months, they come back to us. So you can see that something like return to school could fall in either the unavoidable category or the avoidable category, depending on the individual and the circumstances, and depending on how we as leaders try to influence that decision. Now, the other category then is avoidable, and that's everything else. Everything that is not unavoidable is, of course, avoidable. So which can we influence? Well, we have to put our energy into influencing the avoidable turnover. So avoidable turnover is only a part of the overall gross turnover picture. And smart organizations begin to do this definition and then start to sort the data out that says this percentage of our employees is unavoidable turnover, and this percentage of our employees who leave is avoidable turnover. So there's two things that we can do then in just broad brush terms. And I'm going to mine down in this a little bit further, but in broad brush terms, there's two things we can do that will improve retention. The first thing is we can change the things that are causing people to leave. And in order to do that, we have to understand what those things are. And we have a long history of doing exit interviews, and that's the kind of the purpose behind exit interviews. And exit interviews are actually a double-edged sword, because the people who are most likely to be honest with you are not already the people who have both feet out the door. I like to do stay interviews, and stay interviews allow you to have a discussion, usually one-on-one. It could be a group, a focus group, a team kind of environment, where people talk honestly, sometimes with an outsider like me, sometimes just with their team leader, supervisor, another manager, or even the executive director of the organization. And we pick their brains on what kinds of things would make it easier for them to stay. So if we created some changes, what could we change in order to make them easier to stay? Now, very often the first thing that comes out of people's mouth is more money. And I just take that at face value and I say, okay, we get that. I agree with you. We're working on that. It's an everyday thing here at a senior management level. And if it's not an everyday thing, by the way, senior managers, you better make it an everyday thing, because that one should be, it's a constant, and we should continue to work at improvement of employee retention by improving compensation. However, then I say, okay, we get that, and what else is there that we could be doing? And if you just keep asking that question and versions of that question, you would be surprised at what people will tell you. It'll be a little policy, it'll be a little practice, it'll be something that happened a week ago, a month, a year ago, or a year ago that really made them question whether or not they belong to the organization, should continue working there. The second thing that we can do in broad brush perspective is to create new things that help people stay. So get rid of the barriers, change things that cause people to leave, and then create things that invite people to stay. So I've given you a little graphic on page 9, and you see these are the wheels that turn. So the first strategy here is involvement, participation, and input. We're going to talk more about that. As that wheel turns, and it's turning clockwise in your graphic, it turns the wheel called engagement. So the result of input, involvement, and participation is engagement. And the result of engagement, as that wheel turns, which turns counterclockwise, is it turns the wheel called retention. So we kind of have a chain reaction. We have a series of geared wheels here. When we start turning one wheel, it turns another wheel, which is called engagement. And the wheel of engagement, as engagement improves, retention improves as well. So this is kind of a cause and effect. It's a little bit mechanical, but it does tell us there's stuff that we can do that will improve retention. It may take a little while because each of those wheels will take a while to impact and to make the other wheel turn. So let's go then to increasing participation and involvement. I want you to do an exercise with your teams after this video is done, and here's the exercise. Ask them, with a minimum of 30 minutes to have the conversation, ask them, how could we increase the involvement and participation from you and from the team? And ask it both individually, as in, for you individually, how could we impact the amount of involvement, input that you and participation you have? And then secondly, how do we do this on a group basis? Now, do not be surprised if you meet kind of with dead air, because this, first of all, the first time you've asked this question, so it's a bit of a surprise. And so maybe some people that are a little bit cynical, some of your negative Nellies who are going to say, well, it's not going to make any difference. Don't bother saying anything because nothing ever changes, right? It's difficult to argue that point if they have had multiple opportunities for input and haven't given it, or have had input that hasn't gotten anywhere. It's one of the criticisms that I hear most about employee satisfaction surveys is that I spend my 20 minutes filling out the form, I answer the 40 questions, I push the submit button on SurveyMonkey, and it falls into a black hole. I never get any summary results back, and nothing ever seems to change. Well, you know what? Some of those people have lost their positive attitudes a long time ago, and there's nothing you can do to change it. However, having sat in front of a team of my own as a team leader and asked that very same question of what can we do to increase input, and met stony faces because I was an incoming supervisor and they didn't know me from Adam. As far as they were concerned, I was cut from the same cloth as the previous supervisor had been, and by definition, they didn't particularly believe that I was going to do anything. And so I kept asking, and in that meeting and in future meetings. And then things started to change. I started to use some of their ideas. I started to put some of the new ideas that I came up with in place, and people saw stuff start to improve. And then I went to a team meeting on a sunny June afternoon. I remember that because it was right before my birthday. And I sat in front of this group of people, and someone else was chairing the meeting. We'd begun the process of sharing the leadership of the team. Someone else was chairing the meeting, and they said, well, we've changed it up, Paula. We're going to have the first thing is going to be the things that we would like to see that will be different, and that, we're going to give you input, right? And I thought, we've gone from not wanting to answer the question in stony faces to it's agenda item number 1 because they have stuff they want to tell me. And I knew then that we were making huge strides in the right direction. So really do this, and do it more than once if you need to, until they begin to realize that this is a genuine and sincere activity. If you ask, you must act. It does not mean that every idea will be great and you can use it, right? And you can tell them that straightforwardly. You can say, but I do want to ask, I do want to hear, and then remind yourself to close the circle. And what I mean by closing the circle is when you've taken an idea or a part of an idea or a piece of input is being reflected in the decision, make sure you communicate to them, close the circle and say, because you guys talked about this, we have added this, we have considered this, we have included this in the decision, the plans, the changes that we are making inside the organization. So I just wanted to say thanks and to let you know that we're working on the stuff that you're talking about. It won't be instantaneous, but over time, the level of trust and the level of interaction will improve. I wanted to share with you some from my own experiences, and this was, on my original version of this slide, it was a much longer list and I actually cut it back. So just let me share a couple of things from my experiences where I've seen teams, either teams I've led or teams that I've worked with as a consultant inside the sector. The first one is a team serving adults with disabilities started doing their own scheduling. A big leap of faith by the management team, and the whole team had to come to understand their operating budget and their funding structure. But this whole team took on the responsibility of doing their own scheduling. Team leaders were no longer involved in it, and the whole business of covering shifts and getting coverage became a team responsibility, and it went brilliantly. The responsibility for the team leader was still to support the team and make sure that there was coverage and that the whole thing hung together. So it didn't mean that the team leader wasn't doing anything, but it did make a huge difference in the ownership and people having each other's backs and sharing responsibilities in their workloads. Second was an employee who loved to teach and became a certified trainer in first aid, CPR, and occupational health and safety. That person did a whole bunch of training internally for the organization. They actually had to move into a part-time direct service position so that they could do the training. And in probably 4 or 5 years after they had done their base level certification, they started running their own business. They eventually resigned their position with the agency but continued to contract back for all of the base level training that was being done with new employees and recertifications. A public education team that I knew rewrote all of their training and materials. They added a bunch of new information, and because they really wanted to link with Gen Yers, which are our youngest group of employees inside the sector, they created a whole bunch of social media links. They put it on the server, and they made the training and the information available online. And it made a huge difference in terms of how user-friendly that material was and how connected people were to the organization and the training and information sharing that was available. I know of an accounting team inside a not-for-profit organization who were really frustrated about people not knowing about the benefits and the HR practices of the organization, and they started to do mini in-services, one person at a time, went from the accounting team into other teams inside the organization, did short in-services, asked questions, and it really built relationships between the teams out in the field and the accounting team in the office. And it meant that the teams had a point person so that they could call into the office, ask for the person who'd been out to their team meeting, and ask questions about the benefit package or the HR policies or the vacation leaves or the illness leaves or any of those sorts of things. So it created a whole different sense of relationship and connection across the organization, different engagement in the truest sense. And then the final one on my list is at a monthly all-staff meeting, there's a standing agenda item to do what we call buzz sessions. And the buzz sessions are on 1 or 2 topics. They're usually about 15 minutes long. And the topic is, for example, what can we do to improve employee recognition? People sit at tables, they have a facilitated conversation, one person in the group takes notes, those notes come forward and they come forward to the senior management group around what can we do to improve employee recognition. So every month the agency has a general staff meeting, and every month they do a buzz session on a topic of interest. It's very well received, and it is an ongoing part, a standing agenda item of every general staff meeting. I want to talk about what we can do to improve recognition. Employees who receive recognition are 3 times more likely to be engaged and half as likely to resign their jobs. Now, we are not talking about recognition in the form of a pin, a pen, a t-shirt, or a teaspoon. We all have all those things. We're not talking about junk. We're not talking about stuff. Even if your stuff is expensive stuff, even if the hoodie that you buy is a $60 hoodie, some people will appreciate those, but they become so routinized, so regular, that it's like having another coffee mug on your desk. You already have 3 or 4, and you don't need more of them. So we're talking about employee recognition that's personalized, that's real. I have a colleague who talks about filling up people's buckets, and every employee has something else that will fill their bucket. So this is about personalizing and individualizing the kinds of things that are important to people. It can involve creating a catalog of items that are not just available when you finish your next year or 3 years or 5 years of service, but that are available at strategic points in time when you've worked extra hours, when you've put in extra project time, when the supervisor decides that it would be a good idea to pat somebody on the back. Gift cards are one of those things. I'm understanding there's some taxation implications for those, but frankly, small gift cards are probably still pretty safe to do and will not run amok of any of our federal government rules around what's taxable and what's actually income. And we also need to recognize that as different as individuals are, we are also different generationally. For people of my generation, I'm a flat in the middle baby boomer, right dead in the middle of my generation. Time is often a bigger bucket filler, meaning time away, flexibility of time, time to snowbird, time to be away from cold weather, time to be with grandchildren, those kinds of things can be more important. And for Generation Y, younger generation folks who were born between 1985 and the year 2000, we sometimes call those folks millennials because of the 2000 year frame, is that they absolutely crave feedback and the personal, individualized coaching and support and encouragement of learning. I did a research study a few years ago, and we asked Gen Y employees specifically if they left their employer, because we have a history of employees that are Gen Y's kind of job hopping. If they left their employer, was this in fact a sign of disloyalty to the employer? And uniformly, about 98% of Gen Y said no. When they left, it was for learning opportunities. So my suggestion to you is to create those learning opportunities on site in your own organization. So when you have a bright Gen Yer, and some of you are Gen Yers who are watching this video, ask yourself, what would I like to learn? And Gen Yers step up and ask for that. And everybody else in leadership roles respond to the request of Gen Yers for more learning and more opportunities to grow inside the organization. And they will hang on to you because you are meeting their needs. So we want to reduce turnover and improve retention around Gen Yers. Learning and positive feedback and one-on-one personalized coaching and interaction is really critical. We need to use multiple communication channels, so we need to make sure that we're using social media, that we do letters of acknowledgement on letter stationery, on stationery that belongs to the organization in a formal letter. We write them so rarely now that they have become special again. So that's not a bad thing. A note from the executive director, a letter from the chair of the board to a senior manager to acknowledge and to validate the contributions that someone is making can make a huge impact. Be careful of public and private, and we have a whole module on giving feedback, but some people really like public feedback and many people would rather have it privately. They'd rather have a minute conversation quietly in a hallway as you're passing them that is genuine and heartfelt by way of feedback than to have a public acknowledgement in a staff meeting or a team meeting or another environment that is more public. Money, always, bonuses, recognition with pay increases, activities, time, all of those things need to be personalized for individuals. And make sure that you find many ways to say thank you, and to be thankful for the work that they do, and to say, I see you. I appreciate your work. I understand your acknowledge the contributions that you're making inside the organization. Final one on this list is to make sure that we increase feedback and that we understand that working in a feedback-rich environment improves employee retention. It makes people feel appreciated, and it says, I understand your effort, I understand your contribution, and I care about how you do your job. So the positive feedback is absolutely critical to the whole notion of engagement and retention, and we should not ever let that go. Now, feedback also it's a two-way street. So we want to make sure that we're creating opportunities for feedback out from supervisors and managers to employees, as well as feedback back. And we can do this through tools like 360-degree performance appraisals, so that employees have formal ways to say to the people who supervise them, here's what I love about the supervision that you do, and here's some of the things that I think could improve. So feedback is a two-way street, and this is another example of how we can create engagement through input. So very important that we do this both directions, and we look for opportunities through every month, every quarter, every year to be able to do two-way feedback. We need to do regular employee satisfaction or engagement surveys, and remind yourself that this should be done probably annually, at the very least once every 2 years. And we should be comparing last year's information from this year's information. And please, if you have some need for doing an employee satisfaction, do send me an email at paulamaclean@learningforleaders.ca, and I'll give you a little guidance and support on that. I will be doing a couple of short videos on doing employee satisfaction surveys, but a badly done survey and a badly administered survey can cause an enormous amount of kind of collective angst and difficulty inside your organization. So it's a good thing. I always say there's two things in my life that I will never do. One is hang drywall and the other is lay sod. And let me tell you, it's really important to have some professional expert advice on doing, it doesn't have to come from me, but on doing employee satisfaction surveys. So if you have HR people inside your organization, make sure they study up and do employee satisfaction surveys in a very professional way, because they can do damage in terms of the questions we asked and how the information gets summarized and shared. And we want to make sure that supervisors and managers are skilled at giving constructive critical feedback. This is a very difficult area of the work that we do as leaders in our sector, and it is absolutely important that we are skilled at it. I'm going to give you a whole module on it because it is a skill set that we can acquire, but it's something that we often struggle with and that we sometimes don't, it's not an easy thing to do. We've often grown up in situations where giving critical feedback is not valued and it leads to an argument or a scrap. And, if we get good at it, we can do and solve problems and have early intervention around performance issues that will cause retention rather than cause turnover. So what I want you to do is I want you to get ready to do the learning exercise, and that involves stopping the video. It's self-instructive, but it asks you to identify 3 things that you could do in your team or your workplace that would improve recognition, 3 things that would improve involvement or participation, and 3 things that your team could do to increase retention. So stop it, do a little note-taking session. If you're in a group environment, I'd allow about 20 minutes to a half hour for this conversation. If you're watching this video as an individual, it should take you probably about 10 or 15 minutes at the very most to kind of do your list. And then ask yourself the question, what are the next steps? What can we do in real life? What can we do that will actually improve our employee retention? All right, let me wrap this up then by giving you kind of a summary of some things we've already talked about, but also some new ideas around what are 10 things that we can do to improve employee engagement. The first one that I want to talk about is to make sure that we make new rules very carefully. New rules should be made because 99% of the employees inside your organization need the rule. And if new rules are made in response to 1% of your employees who routinely screw this up, then the problem is that we're penalizing the other 99%. So we need to make rules that apply to the majority. And this is nowhere more obvious to me than when we talk about dress codes. Dress codes are often brought into place not because of health and safety, but because some people annoyingly dress inappropriately for their working day. Give them feedback. They are 1%. If you have 100 employees, chances are you have 1 or 2 people who are your offenders. Give them feedback and tell them, you know what, you're not dressed appropriately for your workday, and either require them to go home or tell them you don't want them to come dressed that way again. And if they challenge you and say, where are the rules? You say, you know what, I'm your supervisor and I have given you that direction, please follow it. So this is a moment where you stand your ground and just simply say, this is a reasonable expectation. By the way, supervisors and managers, make sure it's a reasonable expectation. Do not be picky or petty with people. That is not going to gain you any kind of employee engagement or satisfaction. So we want to make sure that we have a small number of absolute rules that everybody has to follow, and that we don't have a whole bunch of little micro rules that kind of try to regulate common sense. So very important that we make sure that we use our rules and use them very, very carefully, and we make rules for the 99%. Here's a little challenge for you if you have nothing better to do. Go through your HR policies and find out how many of the rules actually apply to a very small number of people, and how many of those rules were created or written. If you know a little bit of history of some of those policies that were written, that were created or written because somebody made a mistake somewhere along the line. We thought, oh, we got to have a policy. right? Well, very often we don't need a policy at all. We need to give feedback. We need to hold that person responsible. We need to discipline them if it was a very serious breach of, good judgment and good practice. And that is often sufficient to communicate that to the individual. And we don't need a rule for everybody else on something that they probably will, a mistake that they would never make. We need to emphasize simplicity. I like to create a little project once every 2 or 3 years. Look for duplicated paperwork. Look for outdated policies. Look for parts of your organization that are no longer current and functional, and make it a systematic part of your process to once every 2 or 3 years go through your practices, your procedures, your policies, and update them to make sure you've got stuff that is, useful and that is going to be appropriate in the very long term, and that will be useful for you. So duplicated paperwork, bureaucratic kinds of things, 2 forms that do the same job that are used by 2 different people that now have to be, both of them filled out. Those kinds of things are the things we need to do that will improve, reduce bureaucracy and improve retention. Create flexible, humane, inclusive workplace. Challenge any kinds of stereotyping and biases. If someone says, those are Gen Yers and they have no work ethic, they're a lazy bunch, in my day, get on them, right? And the reverse is also true. If you hear Gen Yers or Gen Xers being critical of baby boomers and saying, they're no good with technology, challenge those kinds of things in real time, right in the moment. And just say, we don't make progress as a team or as an organization on the backs of anyone. Any forms of discrimination, any forms of bullying, any forms of inappropriate behavior or mistreatment needs to be challenged. It has a huge downward impact on employee satisfaction, and it will result in retention if it's not in turnover, and lower retention if it's not addressed. Give people autonomy to do their jobs. Describe what they must do, and then let them decide how to do it. And that means if you've got a group of newbies that don't know how to do it, coach them through it. Give them guidance, give them feedback, but leave the how. Somebody has to control something in every day. And so let people bring their own gifts and their unique abilities to do things. So give them the what. Here are the standards, here are the expectations, here is your job description, here are your duties. But make sure that you give people some flexibility and some autonomy and being able to decide how they go about doing those things. They'll thank you for it, and your whole system, your whole organization will be stronger as a result. We need to have multiple opportunities for learning and growth, and we need to do that cross-generationally. Make sure that you are determining your learning and growth opportunities based on individuals. And learning should not just be group-based. There's learning that can be done by reading, by self-discovery, by working online, by taking courses independently, by having a mentor, having a coach. So there's lots of opportunities for learning and growth supports employee engagement and supports retention in the long term. I really like to give my teams a reading assignment, short article, something online, and then say, everybody read that for next team meeting. We're going to have a 15-minute conversation about how we might use that. And the topic could be related to client service delivery, it could be related to team building, it could be related to communication, anything that you see that might be helpful. And that's about connecting people's work to their own heads and their own evolution and better practices. We often talk about best practices as if it was a management activity. Best practices start on the ground where people work. They have to understand what is better than what they are doing. They have to be open to new ideas and new ways of work. And they do that for the most part by connecting them with new ideas and fresh ways of looking at things. So look at opportunities for people to, be coached through things, to read new things, to bring it back to the team, to go off and take an online course or a live delivery course and bring that information and understanding back to the team so that the whole team can learn and grow as a result of that. I've talked about this, but it's absolutely critical that managers and supervisors know how to manage change. Best book ever written, in my opinion, is William Bridges' Managing Transitions. He talks about the difference between transition and change, and it's a very critical thing. We're going to devote a whole 3 or 4 video course to managing change and transition at another point in time. So look forward to that. It's an absolutely critical part. The whole sector is always changing, so if you know how to do it well, you'll have lots of opportunities to practice those skills on the job. 8th thing on our list is to ensure that our human resource resources, policies, and practices reflect the best and current thinking. The thinking in the HR sector is always changing. I try and stay on top of it. I'll read a bunch of stuff. A great example of that is 5 years ago we were talking about satisfaction, and the whole idea of engagement had not even darkened the horizon, and now we talk about engagement. And for the first little while I kind of skeptically looked and thought, is there any really difference between these two words? And the more I read, the more I understood that clearly engagement was something worth talking about and something worth embracing, and that it was stronger and better than the passive version of satisfaction. So we need to continue to be doing learning, and we always need to take our HR practices and bring them to the next level. So really important that we stay up to date in that, and that we stay current as managers and supervisors inside our systems. I want you to create a leaderful organization. And the leaderful organization, I have a chapter in my newest book called Following the Leader, which is about executive succession planning. But there's a whole chapter that talks about how do we build leaders from inside. And one of the most powerful strategies that creates engagement and retention is to move people around and give them learning experiences, and to promote talented people from inside the organization. Always hire the best person for the job. And if the best person is an internal candidate that you've supported in their learning, they will be more ready than anybody from outside the organization who might be their competitor in a competition. So and by all means, make them compete, because the reality is that we want to always hire the best person. If that's somebody from outside, so be it. Awesome, fresh blood, come on in, join us. But you should be mentoring, coaching, guiding, supporting people internally, giving them learning opportunities. That creates retention, and that strengthens your leadership from inside, and that gives you really good people to interview from inside the organization. In all probability, they'll stack up very well against outside candidates for most leadership positions. And then finally, train and retrain employees at all levels, and in key skill sets like conflict resolution, like problem solving, like change management, like HR practices. Again, all of those things, the thinking and the practice and the research is changing around them, so we need to continue to have that as an ongoing path for all leaders and emerging leaders inside the organization. I love this little quote at the end of this slide. It says, a manager's job is less about managing other people's work and more about discovering potential, coaching, and helping people. So it's a wonderful kind of quote. That brings us to the end of module number 4, and I welcome your questions and your comments. By all means, send me an email. You can also leave comments below the video right where you're watching it on our website. And once again, my email address is Paula MacLean at learningforleaders.ca. So if there's anything that you're curious about or that I wasn't clear about, or feedback, positive or negative, thumbs up or thumbs down, either way, I like the conversations that we have, and I'm really open to receiving those from you. Until next time, my name is Paula MacLean, and I'm your leadership coach. Bye for now.